right, so good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone, today. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And I am particularly excited because today marks day, I think, 7 of our exciting adventure all month long, celebrating and showcasing amazing women in science and exploration around the globe. So February 11th is the International Day for Women and Girls in STEM. And so to commemorate, since we were founded, we kick out all the men and only bring in the most incredible women from around the globe doing such great work to conserve species, explore the cosmos, explore the planet, and so much more. So thank you for joining us as we continue on this fun train. Now today I'm particularly excited too because this is a story that I wanted to tell with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants since we started as an organization, and that is about the Devil's Hole pupfish. So we are going to learn today about saving fish in the desert. Sounds oxymoronic, sounds very strange, but we are going to learn from Dr. Jenny Gumm, who is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she is the lead of the Meadows Fish Conservation Facility, one of the most unique places on this planet for saving a really special species behind one of the iconic conservation stories, not only in the U.S., but around the world. So without further ado, Dr. Gumm, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited you could join to tell this story, and take us away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm super excited to share the story of the Devil's Hole pupfish, and especially during Women in Science Month, just really excited to be here. So as Jesse said, I am with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I work at the Meadows Fish Conservation Facility, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. I'm going to show you around a little bit where I am, but you can find me virtually if you have questions or anything. I have both my email and my Twitter account listed there. So if you have any questions after the talk that we don't get to during the question session, please feel free to reach out. So when you think about fish, you don't usually think about fish in the desert. When you think about a desert, you probably conjures up some sort of image in your head of sand and dry, dusty, rocky kind of habitat where you don't have much vegetation and you don't have many animals, mainly because you don't have much water. And the desert that I work in is the Northern Mojave Desert, and where I work looks very different. So I work at the Meadows National Wildlife Refuge, which you can see here might not look like what you think a desert should look like, mainly because there's a big body of water right there. That's a reservoir that we have on site here at the Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. But we also have this water comes from a bunch of different springs that bubble up here in the middle of the desert. And so we do have this very special oasis that is protected. It's been protected since 1984 when it was made a National Wildlife Refuge because of the special plants and animals that live here in this special part of the desert. So exactly where we are, starting in the upper right-hand corner here, you can see Las Vegas, Nevada. And so that is, if you go about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas, you'll find Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. If you go just a few more miles down the road, you'll find Death Valley National Park. And if you've heard of Death Valley National Park, you'll know that maybe it is the hottest, driest place on Earth. So we are just down the road from what is literally the hot, dry desert environment that you probably think of. So on the Meadows National Wildlife Refuge, we do have a little bit of land, though, that is part of Death Valley National Park. Technically, it is part of Death Valley that's found in the state of Nevada, not in California with the rest of the national park. And the reason that we have this little addition to the park is because of the special habitats that we have here. And so this was included in 1952 by President Truman as part of Death Valley National Monument at that point. And so this place is called Devil's Hole, and it is part of the Death Valley National Park. It doesn't look like much if you look at it, the picture in the middle. it really, from above, from a satellite view, it looks like a big hole in the ground. And really, that's what it is. And so you could be walking or driving by it and maybe not notice, except for the fact that there is quite a bit of infrastructure around Devil's Hole now because it is part of the park. And so if you were to go to visit Death Valley, Devil's Hole specifically, which you can do, it is open to the public, you would find this walkway right here in the lower picture. You can see a bit of a platform here that's surrounded by some fencing. And you can stand on this platform and look down into Devil's Hole. So what's down there is this really cool extreme environment that was seen and identified as being so special and such a special place that it needed to be preserved as part of a national park. And you have two different views here. So if you look on the right over here, this is from the water's surface looking up, and you can see that walkway with that fencing there. So this is the water is about 60 feet below where that walkway is. And you can see it's really rocky terrain, very difficult to get down to the water's surface. But we have to do this to study the ecosystem and the species that live there. You can see on the left-hand side over here, a little bit closer up picture of Devil's Hole itself. Now, this area is the opening of the pool, and this is about 60 feet long, and it's about 12 to 15 feet across. So it's not a very large area, and it is said to be one of the smallest habitats for any species on Earth. And that's because this area right here, there's my pointer. Okay, so this area right here where you have this walkway sort of over the surface of the water, this is a very special walkway that was designed solely for Devil's Hole. It is so that we can access the water and the habitat without actually touching the water. So we never step foot in Devil's Hole. We never risk accidentally stepping on a fish or an egg or anything like that. All of the work that we do suspended above the habitat. So we actually put this platform out every time we go out and work in the habitat. And for scale, you can see a diver here. We do scuba dive to count the fish, and a couple of other Park Service employees that are getting ready to help count the fish that live in Devil's Hole. So this is deep enough to scuba dive in. I'm going to talk about how deep it is in a second, but this area under the platform is only about maybe a foot to a foot and a half deep. So you could stick your arm in and maybe up to your elbow would be as deep as it is. And this is the only place in the world where the Devil's Hole pupfish finds food, lays eggs, and does all of their other fishy business. So this is a very small area that they have to live in. In addition to being just a really small habitat, it is a super extreme habitat. So it's in the desert, it's hot, but the water itself is hot too. So the water bubbles up and it's geothermally heated. So the water coming up from the deep part of Devil's Hole is actually about 94 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's the coolest that it can get on this shallow shelf area where the water is shallower. You'll actually in the summertime get the temperatures to be quite a bit hotter, and they'll reach close to 100 degrees in terms of the water. Now, not many fish can actually live in temperatures that hot, which is one of the things that makes the Devil's Hole pupfish special. In addition to having really hot water, there's not much oxygen, and not many fish, again, can deal with aquatic habitats that don't have oxygen. Fish, even though they live in water, they do breathe and use oxygen just like we do. Not just like we do, but they use their gills. And the Devil's Hole pupfish is adapted to live in this habitat where there is not much available oxygen. The final thing that's really extreme about Devil's Hole in terms of the habitat itself is that it's very energy limited. So you might be familiar with the concept of a food web in a habitat where you've got plants and photosynthesis driving the food web, and then other animals eat the plants, and then other animals eat the herbivores that eat the plants. And so we have this food web, but at the bottom of the food web, you have sunshine that's driving photosynthesis that plants do. In Devil's Hole, because of the orientation of these walls, you don't get very much sunshine. And so you can see the sun hitting the water here in this picture, but this doesn't happen year round. So from about November to February, there are about 4 months of the year where there's no sunshine at all that actually hits the water's surface. And so that means that no algae can grow, no plants can grow, and it really limits the other types of animals that can live in Devil's Hole. And it really doesn't provide much energy for the fish themselves. There's just not much food. In addition to the cool biology parts of Devil's Hole, it's also geologically really cool. So Devil's Hole is a cave, and you can see a scuba diver deep in the cave on the left-hand side here. On the right-hand side, you have a little schematic of what the cave looks like. We know that the fish live in about the top 80 feet of water, but we don't actually know how deep the water is, like at all. Divers have been down to 435 feet, and they've been able to see to about 500 feet, but below that, we don't know. We have no idea how deep Devil's Hole really is. And so it's got a lot of mythology around it, and unknown sort of spooky stories that go along with Devil's Hole, because it is such a huge unknown in terms of the habitat itself. Because it is directly connected to the aquifer, which is the water that's found underground, sort of your groundwater. When you have, it's just a very large body of water. It's so big that it actually has its own tides. So the oceans have tides where the water level will go up and down. Devil's Hole is large enough that it has a tidal cycle, and the water increases and decreases about 2 inches or so every day. And then this changes over the month with the moon. So you can predict the water level based on whether or not it's a full moon or how close you are to the full moon. In addition, some other effects of being such a large body of water is that it's very well connected. And we don't really know how well connected, but we know that it's really well connected. So I'm going to show you a video here. And what you're going to see is a couple of extreme disturbance events. The first one is going to be a flood. And this happened last summer. And what you'll see, this is Devil's Hole. This is the area down here, the shallow shelf. And we had a flash flood. And so we got all of this water and rain just pouring into Devil's Hole. This doesn't happen very often. These happen approximately once every 10 to 15 years. And so it was really an extreme event that happened out in Devil's Hole recently. Now, the second event I'm going to show you has to do with how big and how well connected that cave is. And so this is going to be, I went a little far, sorry. So what happens is that we get effects of earthquakes in Devil's Hole. And so you can have earthquakes that occur in Alaska, Indonesia, Peru and Argentina, down in the southern hemisphere. Earthquakes all over the world will actually cause waves in Devil's Hole. So what you're going to see really quickly here is just some wave action. So focus on, nope, doesn't want me to show my video. Okay. Sorry about that. Here we go. So we're seeing some earthquakes all over the world causing waves. And you can see that shallow shelf there is just exposed. So this is a picture from an underwater camera on that shallow shelf. And you can see the water has just dropped because you've got this wave action. So I'm going to show this again one more time really quickly. We're looking out here at the shallow shelf, and you can see those waves. Those were about 15-foot waves from some earthquakes in the summer of 2019. Okay, so despite all of this extreme stuff about Devil's Hole, there is a fish that lives there, and this is Cyprinodon diabolus, the Devil's Hole pupfish. They are very special because of the special habitat that they live in. They can deal with those hot temperatures. They can deal with having almost no oxygen, and they actually look different from other species of pupfishes. They're smaller because there's that food limitation in the habitat. And they actually don't grow. Usually most fish have another set of fins down here on their belly, and Devil's Hole pupfish don't have those. It's something to do with the amount of food and the temperature, and those two variables interact and result in the fact that they don't grow pelvic fins. So one of the most important things about the Devil's Hole pupfish is the population size. And so this is the number of fish that have been counted in Devil's Hole since 1972. And the top line here is the number of fish counted in the late summer or early fall. And the lower line is fish counted in the spring. So it's lower in the spring usually because you're coming out of that period of time where there's really no food. That's really difficult, and you have losses in the population. Many fish don't make it through the winter because there's just not enough food. But historically, we see population sizes between 400 and 500 until about the mid-90s when the population crashed, and then again in the early 2000s when the population crashed again. And so at the lowest, there were 35 and 38 fish left in the wild total for the entire species. 35 Devil's Hole pupfish left on Earth. And so this is why this is a really important conservation story, because this fish is close to extinction and has been very close to extinction. Some of you might have more than 35 people in your classrooms right now. And there were less fish than that left in the world. Now, the good news is that the population has rebounded, and we haven't been able to do many counts due to the pandemic since 2020, but we do know that the population size is about stable. Our last count was in the end of September, and the population size was 174. So they're doing okay for pupfish. But because they're so rare, because there's so few of them, we spend a lot of time, especially Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, and the state of Nevada. All of these agencies work together to manage the population and to try to conserve the Devil's Hole pupfish. So teamwork really makes the dream work in our world. And we wouldn't be able to have the successes that we have with the fish, both in the wild with that population and in captivity, without coordination between these different partners. And so what do you do with a fish that's really rare in the wild? You try to establish a backup population in captivity. And this was done for a long time. So about the past 50 years, people have been trying to do this. And this is what these old refuge populations look like. It's just like a small concrete tank. It's smaller than a swimming pool, if you were to have a swimming pool. And so these were not really successful. They were lost for various reasons. And then when the population hit that 35 individuals, somebody thought maybe we should try something else. And what they did was they built a new kind of captive habitat for the Devil's Hole pupfish. So this is the Meadows Fish Conservation Facility, and it might not look like much. It's only about a mile from Devil's Hole in our lovely desert habitat. But inside this structure here is something that we call the Refuge Tank. And if you look down, you'll see this large body of water. And this is 100,000 gallons of water. Those previous refuge tanks were about 1,000 gallons of water. This is 100,000 gallons of water. Most of it is underground, so it's like a cave. And this is where we have the captive population of Devil's Hole pupfish. Now, if you look down, you can see some pretty similar aspects, right? So we have Devil's Hole on the left and the refuge tank on the right. They both have a deep pool area. Devil's Hole, more than 500 feet. The refuge tank, this is only 22 feet deep, but still it's 22 feet deep. That's pretty deep for a captive fish population habitat. You'll also see the shallow shelf. They actually, when they built the fish conservation facility, They 3D scanned the shallow shelf of Devil's Hole and then carved it out of a single piece of styrofoam covered with fiberglass. And so it is an exact replica of Devil's Hole. It is filled with the same algae, the same invertebrates and food sources for the pupfish. And really, it's trying to recreate Devil's Hole in captivity. We have control over many of the variables that are extreme in Devil's Hole. So temperature, we do keep it a little bit cooler, just so that it's not as hard on the fish physiologically. We give them a little bit more oxygen. And we do have some differences because of those differences in temperature, in that we have more insects compared to crustaceans in the captive environment. And then we don't get floods or earthquakes happening. So sometimes we actually have to go in and vacuum the shallow shelf to remove dead algae, things like that. So we've recreated the ecosystem. What about the fish themselves? So what we do is we collect eggs from Devil's Hole. This is Olin Feuerbacher, our aquaculturist, looking at a small piece of carpet attached to a tile that's deployed in Devil's Hole. So we put these carpets out once a month for 4 days. We bring them back into the lab. We kind of shake them off, and then the eggs fall off the carpets, and then we search for the eggs. If we find any eggs, which, spoiler alert, we do, and they do hatch, you can see, we rear them to maturity in the lab. So we raise them up. We work on trying to spawn them in captivity because it's really important for us to have an independent population that doesn't fully rely on the wild habitat. And then they go into the refuge tank. And this has been really successful. This is our setup here. This is where we keep the Devil's Hole eggs up here in these tanks. And then we grow out fish in some smaller tanks. It's not very fancy. It's a fish room, kind of like a small aquarium. And then this is where we do our breeding trials. So we work with the fish to try to breed them in captivity, just in 20-gallon glass aquaria. Some of you might have something like this at home. Probably not with pupfish in them, but maybe with some other fishes. And this has been really successful. We now also collect eggs from the refuge tank, do the same thing. And then now we also have gotten the fish to breed in our propagation room, our fish lab. And so we have eggs here as well. So we do lots of research, looking at morphological variation, looking at growth rates, looking to see at how fish in these different places might be differing from each other, because we do want the captive fish to be as similar to those in the wild as possible. So with that, I will show you here one more video of some fish in the refuge tank. So you can see it's going well. We haven't been able to scuba dive to count in the refuge tank again since like February of 2020. But we do see a lot of fish on the surface. And our recent counts estimate that we have between 200 and 250 Devil's Hole pupfish in the refuge tank at this point. And then we have about an additional 75 to 100 in our fish room. So we do have more fish in captivity at this point than there are in the wild, we think. And with that, I think that's about my 20 minutes, and we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions.
Absolutely. What a beautiful last video. I'm so glad you're sharing this, by the way. Like, it's just so stunning. It's so, I mean, I'm listening to this whole story and I'm so heartened. I'm like hurting. My face is hurting from smiling at these amazing fish and how many of them you have. But yeah, feel free to come out of screen share. While you're doing that, again, just a huge thank you for sharing this really unique story. Honestly, in the history of conservation, it's such a special tale, and I'm so glad we got the chance to feature it. For our folks on YouTube, please feel free to share questions. Live classes, unfortunately, did have a few tech issues today getting in, but they did share some questions with me via email. So Dr. Gumm, we're going to talk about that over the next 15-20 minutes and share some of those. And the first big question we got in all our classes is, how do you possibly get into this role? It's such a unique position to have on this planet. What drew you to it? How do you get here? What sort of experience do you need to end up in a role like this where you're helping save this really unique population?
Right. So my journey to working for the Fish and Wildlife Service is a little bit different than a lot of other folks that work for Fish and Wildlife Service. I was interested in animal behavior when I went to college, and I was always interested in colorful fishes. My parents took me snorkeling when I was like 10. And I was just enamored with colorful reef fishes. And still, last weekend, my husband and I went to an aquarium store, and I'm just, sitting there looking at the fish. They're so cool. And so I was interested in how and why they end up with these extreme colorful traits. And so I went to graduate school and I got interested in research that has to do with why fishes have extreme traits. Fish color is similar to birds singing. Oftentimes it has something to do with attracting a mate. And so that sort of led my path into studying reproductive behavior and social behavior of other species of pupfishes. And so I was in a university setting. I was a teacher a professor at a university for a number of years, but I had gotten started working on pupfish species. And so I had this background in similar closely related species. And so when I saw this position here, I'd always kind of heard about the fish conservation facility, and I visited it once when it was being built as a field trip. And so I came to see it just like you guys are coming to see what we do, kind of as a field trip. And sort of always had that in the back of my mind. When I saw that the position was open, it was a good time for me and my family to move to a bigger city and try somewhere else and take a bit of an adventure out in the desert. So here we are.
I love that you highlighted the actual going to an aquarium store thing. Like, of course, a lot of the speakers we bring on are like dripping with passion for their topic, for their field, their animal. But the fact that you're just like still so vested in colorful fish is amazing. I'm curious, actually, before the next class question, is there dimorphism? So are the males and females different colors because they're trying to attract each other sort of with that coloration, or are they the same?
In most species of pupfish, there are. And so there are other species of pupfish that live here at Ash Meadows, just not in Devil's Hole, where the males will get this beautiful yellow and blue coloration. And the males are really territorial. And so that's their main extreme thing, is that territorial males are big bullies. In the Devil's Hole pupfish, it's a little more subdued. So there is a subtle color difference. The males will have a little bit of black on their tail. On their tail fin, and then some of the other fins. And so they get a little bit more blue, but they are just, there's no stripes, there's no other colors or anything like that. They're just this beautiful blue. And females are a little bit less blue. Females are a little bit more silvery.
It's funny, you mentioned this cave thing with the missing fins. It's really unique. A lot of things that live in caves around the world do end up with missing eyes, no coloration, just adaptations that they've evolved into because there's no need for some of those things in that sort of resource poor environment, which makes it all the more special that they're so blue. It's such a unique thing to see. I'm really curious, or classes are really curious. How big is the team at the facility? So you're making all this good stuff happen. You mentioned one other guy checking out with the carpets. How many of you are there that are there?
We have 4 full-time employees that work at the fish facility. So I'm the facility manager. We have an aquaculturist who specializes in aquarium systems and does amazing work on fish health and has a background actually in microbiology. So you might think I'm not an animal person, I'm more of a lab person, but his background in microbiology and genetics is actually a huge benefit to us. And so he's our fish health specialist. We have a biological technician that does most of the monitoring of the refuge tank. So we monitor everything you can count or keep track of in the refuge tank. We do algae, invertebrates, eggs, all sorts of stuff. So we have someone that does that. And then we actually have a maintenance specialist who runs all of the pumps and the filters and basically is our plumber, electrician, kind of a person. And so we all have very different specialties, but it takes all of us together for this to work.
So I used to work at Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto, and they had a team of like 30 people that did all the pumps and stuff like that, where if they do something wrong, there's 10 other people to catch their mistake and they can fix it within an hour. You have one person that's their job is this entire endangered species, which is it's a very high stakes role. I'm actually, on that note, you showed
it can be a little stressful sometimes.
I imagine. Well, so you show this footage of like the big waves and the flooding. Like, you have this clip and you're watching this happen. And I mean, I must say, as someone who's like not directly responsible for the lives of these animals, it's terrifying. Like I'd be beside myself. So what happens? How are you feeling when you're watching that? And how soon are you able to like get in after the flash flood to be like, what happened? Is everything okay? Or how does it go?
Yeah, so the flash flood was probably the main event that I had that kind of experience. So I was here on site. The earthquakes, oftentimes they happen after hours, or the one from July, it happened on the 4th of July. So we only had one person here taking care of the fish. Everybody else was enjoying a barbecue somewhere. And so the flash flood that we had, we were all here and we saw it coming on the radar. The first thought is get people home, get people out. We are out in the middle of nowhere, dirt roads, tough roads. People could get stuck, and it has happened in the past that people have gotten stuck here for 3 or 4 days because of a flood, like 10 years ago. And so the first thought is make sure that the people that can get out and need to get home can get home. And then the second thought is, okay, what are the rest of us doing? And so the aquaculturist and I decided we would stay for a set amount of time. And if it hadn't eased up or stopped raining in 25, I think it was 25 or 30 minutes, then we were also going to leave. And so what we did was we set up battery powered extra pumps and heaters and things like that, and tried to get everything, because in case we lost power, we were just trying to set everything up that if we left and had to be away for 2 or 3 days and couldn't get back on site, that the fish would be okay. So we have some automated feeders, things like that we don't like to use, but we have in emergency cases. So we were just getting everything ready. Luckily, the rain did stop. We were still there. And then it became, okay, when is it safe to go out and check out what happened? So we waited until the rain had definitely stopped and we knew there was not going to be any more rain, so that it was safe for us to go to Devil's Hole. And that was really like, I joined the team in 2018. We had a right before the fall count, and that was the highest count in 15 years. And we've had great success in breeding, and the refuge population is doing well. So like most of the times that I've worked with the species have been really good times.
Yeah.
And so this was really the first situation where I had to, in my head, I was like, okay, I need to prepare myself. We don't know what we're going to find.
Yeah.
We don't know if we're going to find fish at all. And so walking into that, there was a lot of like sort of mental preparation of just trying to, okay, you need to do these things. You need to see what's what, take notes, take pictures, document, try not to think too much about what it means.
Yeah.
Try not to cry if it's bad, like so that you can just focus and get the work done. But yeah, that was the first day that I actually thought, it was like, they could be extinct in the wild. We don't know. And luckily they weren't. We didn't find any mortalities or anything. They're used to their environment.
I was going to say,
like, don't happen very often. They go off the shelf. They go down deep and they like hide out. And so they were fine. The population is still doing great, but yeah, it was a scary day.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, I mean, you started the presentation talking about all their adaptations to this really unique and sort of harsh environment. It's like, that's where you're like really happy for that. When something extra bad happens, you're like, okay, like if anyone's going to be prepped as good as possible, it's these guys. And honestly, from the human perspective, I'm really glad you mentioned this, because I mean, people think we've done broadcasts with conservationists all over the world, and I think sort of you instinctually think Guyana, okay, it's going to be hard to get around there. The U.S. and a major national park is not one of those places. So the fact that there is a consideration of how to get there, what's needed, setting up automated features is a really good one. So I'm glad you covered that as well. That is terrifying, but I'm glad it all worked out for the best. On a much more low stakes question, do you, from our family joining us in Quebec today, do you scuba dive? So are you one of the people that goes down in the water, or not yet?
I do scuba dive, and I have been down into the Refuge Tank to count the fish that we have in captivity. I'm not cave certified, and so I have not been scuba diving in Devil's Hole. So that is something that is on the plans, maybe. Cave diving is always a little scary, and so we can't travel or do training or anything still right now quite yet. So
soon. We're almost there.
Yeah, once we get through and back to work a little bit more regularly, then I'll have to actually like, do I want to do it or not? And Oh, I
yes.
definitely want to do it.
You totally do. You can't
not want to do
even hide it. That's on your face. Like, so we have regularly on this broadcast, one of the main people we have on is the world's top cave diver, and she'll tell you, like, it's a very scary thing. This is like the most intense thing you can basically do on this planet, but it's so amazing. It opens up such a new world, and especially in a context like yours, where you've had such an intimate relationship with them in so many ways. What a special opportunity. I really will get that certification, and when you do, we'll have you back on a broadcast just about that, because it's such a cool thing. Kudos to you. All right. Other fish. So again, one of our questions from our groups today, have you done experiments on other groups of fish before? Has it just been the pupfish since you got into this field, or what's going on?
I've actually worked on over 30 species of fishes. So I've worked on all different kinds of fishes. Mostly it's the types of questions that are similar. So I got into conservation biology and some habitat restoration, thinking about how habitats influence reproduction, right? So when you have an endangered fish, you want to make more of them. So sometimes you can change the habitat to influence them, give them good egg laying sites, give them good habitat that will increase the population in the wild. So that's how I got into conservation biology. But I have a whole other kind of research background in sensory ecology. And so I did quite a bit of time as a postdoctoral researcher on a group of fishes called darters, which are found in the southeastern United States. And there's many, many species. They're awesome. They're really maybe 2 inches, usually at their biggest, but they have the best colors of any freshwater fishes you can find. And so I studied the evolution of coloration, how coloration influenced mate choice, and then I got into their eyeballs and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what colors these fishes could see. Turns out sometimes they have colors that they can't even see themselves.
So exciting. Whenever we get into animal vision and some of the things, like, I mean, humans actually, as color vision goes in the animal kingdom, we're pretty up there. Like, we beat out a lot of things. But when you come to marine animals like turtles, quite a few fish, things like a mantis shrimp, like, it's mind-blowing, the colors. I mean, you could try and tell a person about what they can see, but it's really hard to visualize literally what that's like. Anyway, very, very cool. Sensory ecology is an amazing topic. We could do a whole other broadcast on that for you.
Yes.
All right. So in your very terrifying population graph, what happened in the 90s and early 2000s? Like, was there a set cause that we know for this, or like, yeah?
There's probably a few things that contributed to it. Changes in the ecosystem at that point in time, changes in the ecosystem were not really being monitored very well. So they were looking at fish numbers on a regular basis, but we don't know what was happening to the food web. We don't know what was happening to, other sorts of changes out there. The main thing that happened at first was that the water level went down. So one of the reasons Devil's Hole is protected is that in the late 60s, somebody came in and they put a well right next to Devil's Hole, and they were going to drain it for their cattle. And so the water level never actually went all the way back up. And we know that water level influences population size a lot. That's not what happened in the 90s. There probably was something to do with food availability, resources like that. And there also were accidents. There was at least one situation where some fish traps got washed in because of a flood that was not forecast. And that did also contribute to some population numbers going down. Not extensively, that wasn't like the main thing, but it was sort of like there were a bunch of things happening all at once.
Well, testament to the modern day approach where you have this amazing facility to breed, this sort of, I guess, backup population of sorts, and all the work that's done to monitor the fish that are actually in Devil's Hole. I mean, it's something that we're seeing with conservation around the globe, that there's been so much investment, both for individual species, symbolically of the importance of endangered species, of this incredible, ethos that we've built up around the world. The U.S. is one of the world leaders in this, in sort of pioneering the Endangered Species Act, leading to so many great things for species around the world, but there's still a lot of work to do. And again, a lot of dedication that's necessary to make sure that we keep these things as healthy and happy as possible for as long as we possibly can. So I'm sad that was the case in the 90s, early 2000s. Seemed to be the case with a lot of species. You're not alone. But I'm glad to see that you guys are getting more and more. And that's, again, testament to all your great work. Very, very cool.
Yeah, the structure of collaboration was set up in the early 2000s, and that's really been the thing that has helped bring success. And so we have a team, from all of these different agencies that meets once a week to talk about what's happening, what's the latest from Devil's Hole, what's the latest from the fish facility, what's the latest on the refuge, and all of our different studies and stuff that we bring all together. No.
They're coming right now. They're trying to meet you this moment.
Yeah. And the other thing I do want to mention is that at this point, we don't, a common question haven't got it yet, but we don't put fish back out in the wild at this point.
Okay. I was actually going to ask that next. So there you go. You beat me to it. And is there a reason why you don't do that, or what's the motivation?
It's a cautious approach to the wild habitat. The team does talk about, what that moment is or what that population size is that would require that. And a lot of it just is because we don't have enough information yet. And so we're working on a lot of genetic and genomic studies. We're getting a genome for the Devil's Hole pupfish right now. We're looking at the genetic variation that exists in the wild versus the captive population, because we want to make sure that those are similar. And so that is really one of the key things that we need to know that before we go and would put fish back in the wild. But at this point in time, we only take eggs. We've never taken adult fish from a Devil's Hole, just these eggs, and they come into the fish facility, and then they live out their lives there. But they do breed in the refuge tank and everything like that. So they do have a pretty semi-natural experience.
Well, and testified by the fact that you did a laser scan of the actual shelf that they're on and built it. I mean, it's just, honestly, it's so exciting. I'm so glad we got a chance to tell this story, and I would love to have you back in the future. It's such a cool, it's such an inspiring conservation project. Like, as a person who gets to work with a lot of conservationists around the world, the passion and the thought that went into this is such a special thing. And I'm so glad we get the chance to share it with classes around Canada and the US today. It's fantastic. So thank you so much, Jen.
Such a weird experiment, right? Like, at some point in time, there were people sitting around being like, okay, well, what should we do about this fish that might be going extinct?
Yeah.
What if we build another? What if we just build
another cave? Yeah.
Like, let's just make another one. And then they did it. And then, getting eggs was a huge effort to get that. We don't get very many eggs every month. We do it once a month. Like this month we got 5 fish that hatched. And so it's like it's tiny incremental increases in adding to the population. But everything we do is experimental and new, and that makes it pretty exciting.
Well, and the nice thing too is, and again, this is such a US example, but I mean, if you look at species like the American alligator, the bison, the California condor, like there's a whooping crane. I mean, you guys have done such an amazing job with government collaboration, with amazing organizations coast to coast across the US that have worked to bring back species from the brink. Like, this is not, it's not unheralded. This has happened before in many ways. And all it takes is a group of people that are willing and capable and come up with crazy ideas like building a new cave in the desert. And so, again, kudos to you for all this amazing work. I really do encourage our classes joining you today. Check out the Ash Meadows Conservation Facility. Check out Devil's Hole, all the amazing work being done in the park by Dr. Gumm and her colleagues, her small, tight-knit, amazing team of a few people that have way too much job responsibility. Is there any last message you want to share with our groups today? Again, we had classes sign up today from across California, New York, BC, Quebec, Alberta, Ontario. No matter where you're joining from in the continent, is there like a final message that sort of underscores everything you're trying to do? No pressure.
I think my, biggest perspective is from a scientific point of view, that success when it comes to conservation and recovery of species requires all different types of ideas. We need geneticists, we need microbiologists, we need people that work on hormones of fish. We need all of these different types of people and people that work on, maintenance mechanics and things like that. So we need such a diversity of people that do different things to be successful. And we also need a diversity of people in terms of who those people are and what their backgrounds are and where they come from. Everybody comes and brings their own experience to the table. And my experience might be very different from somebody else's that grew up somewhere else, that has a different, history, background, family, life, all of these sorts of things. And so thinking about diversity in our teams, as well as the science that we do and what we bring to the table, really, that's the only way that we're going to be successful in this instance and also in the future. So
it's so heartening to see that so many independent conservationists, literally worldwide, have such a similar message when it comes to what they want people to take home. Like, it's so nice that the culture shifted so much where people want to collaborate and bring in everyone and highlight those different skill sets, and that it's been leading to such great success for wildlife and places around this planet. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll end the broadcast there, but I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope all our classes take the opportunity to look up more about all the work you're doing. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and we will say